Hello, everyone, and welcome to our November webinar with a special focus on veteran students and how we as wellness professionals can support them as they transition back to academic life. I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Cindy. I'm with the Higher Education Center, and we're pleased to have Dr. Michael Marks, a professor of practice in psychology and the director of the supportive education for returning veterans at the University of Arizona, as our special guest today. Before we get started, we just want to go through a few housekeeping things, including how you can ask questions if you have them throughout the presentation. And so if you have questions, we encourage you to enter them into the question box in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We also want to encourage you to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. Membership benefits include unlimited access to our Screen Use suite of tools, a web-based screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment program. Additionally, Higher Education Center members have access to our Recovery Ally training materials, our past and current learning collaboratives, including the one that is happening right now around engaging peers in health promotion, intervention, and recovery supports on campus, as well as access to our weekly newsletter and our other monthly webinars. You can learn more about our membership benefits by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce to all of you Dr. Michael Marks. Dr. Marks is currently a professor of practice in psychology and program director of the supportive education for returning veterans at the University of Arizona. He is also executive director of One Tree Learning Institute. Previously, he served as lead psychologist and evidence-based practice coordinator at the Southern Arizona VA healthcare system. Dr. Marks has functioned as the PTSD Outpatient Clinic TeamLeader and as a PTSD mentor for VA hospitals across Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. Dr. Marks was co-founder of Vietnam Veterans of Montana and has received the Disabled Americans Veterans Humanitarian Award. He was selected as the 2012 Outstanding Clinician of the Year by the American Psychological Association's Division 18 VA section. He is also co-developer of the nationally recognized Supportive Education for Returning Veterans, or SERV program, which is a cohort-based curriculum designed to help veterans transition from military to academic life. The SERV curriculum has been cited by the Veterans Administration as a best practice and is part of the VA's Strong Practices Project. Dr. Marks has co-authored numerous books and articles and presented nationally on resilience and post-traumatic growth. He and his colleagues at One Tree Learning Institute provide resilience training to members across the healthcare and public service communities. Dr. Marks has dedicated his career to working with trauma survivors, both military and civilian, adults and children, for the last 44 years. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Marks.
You're more than welcome. All that stuff just means I'm really old. So let's start with a question that I have for you all. And that is, when you hear the word or term veteran, what's the first word that comes to your mind? And Cindy will put you into a place where you can answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Marks. So we're going to do things a little bit differently when we ask a poll question today, and we encourage all of you to use your web browser or your phone to visit www.menti.com. I'm going to move one slide back, and if you're visiting on your phone, this is probably what it will look like. So visit www.menti.com. And then when it provides you with a place to enter the code, you're going to use the code 841276. And you should be prompted with the question that we've posed to you on our slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong code. The code is 964553. I apologize for that. So use the code at the top of the screen here, 964553, to answer the question. When you hear the term veteran, what is the first word that comes to mind? And we'll give you a couple of moments to do that.
Those are great. Those are great.
That looks like most of our votes today.
Yeah, it does. Good. Okay, great. Those are all great. Part of why I ask people this is we all have certain stereotypes or biases about veterans, even the good things. You'll find amongst veterans, they like to say, even though they represent 1% of the population, if you're in the military, you're going to meet a whole cross-section of people. You're going to meet good people, bad people, lazy people, all kinds of folks. And when they come back out into the civilian world, frequently some of these stereotypes, for example, hero, people put down. I have a Marine, so when you think of Marines, of course, you think of, you know, first in, all that. Well, he was a weatherman in Iraq. So when he comes back and people tell him he's a hero, he really doesn't feel that way, and it creates a lot of stress. So part of why I ask this again is for you all to keep in mind, do you have certain biases or ways of looking at veterans that may impact how you see them and how you respond to them? Can we move on, Cindy? Thank you. So one of the things I know you all are alcohol and drug misuse and prevention in recovery work. So originally when I thought of this, I did some research, and essentially the biggest difference between student veterans and civilians' drinking patterns, they drink about the same amounts. Their reasons are different. Certainly people with PTSD can use substances as a way to self-medicate, but it's also a problem. Just student veterans frequently will drink to regulate their mood. There's a lot of anxiety associated with going back to campus and being in a much different culture. But their consumption rates are pretty much the same. Of course, we always talk about post-traumatic stress, and I'm assuming most of you as wellness people and social workers are pretty familiar with the symptoms. Cluster, the axis one, of course, is witnessing or being confronted with an event that where there's death or serious injury to self or others, and a sense of intense fear, helplessness, fear and horror. These are kind of the clusters: re-experiencing, arousal, and avoidance. You'll notice the arrows go back and forth. So avoidance can increase arousal. It can also increase re-experiencing, and it goes round and round. The most difficult of these symptoms to treat clinically is actually avoidance. And the best example I can give to you is for the people attending this webinar right now. Have any thought you want to have. Think about whatever you want to think about, but don't think about your left hand. Don't think about it. Don't think about your left hand. Anything else? Of course, most of you are going to start thinking about your left hand. The interesting thing in this is the human brain is fascinating that way. A lot of times they'll go, okay, we won't think about that, but tonight you're going to have nightmares. So you're going to have to deal with this one way or another. One of the things about, especially around PTSD, is in the military, these are actually adaptive skills. I have had more than my share of veterans going back for second, third, and fourth deployments, worrying that they're not going to be able to do their job successfully because they recognize they have PTSD. In fact, those PTSD symptoms in a combat zone are actually life-saving. So then in a campus environment, of course, you're looked at as kind of weird if you're being hypervigilant all the time, isolating yourself, having your back to the wall, tend to be inflexible in class. Those kind of things tend not to go really well. These are the stereotypes, some of the stereotypes that veterans will sit in the back of the room. I actually have veterans who will sit in the front of the room because they don't want to be distracted by looking around. Some veterans can be startled by noises. A lot of times they won't engage in student discussion. And then other times they'll go completely the other way. They'll try and dominate the conversation. One of the things I think that's important for you all as wellness professionals to understand that one of the biggest adjustment problems is the clash of cultures. I jokingly say that if the military had wanted you to have an independent thought, they would have issued you one. Of course, in college, in academia, the whole goal is to question everything. It's about process, not about outcome. You'll see on the slide, there's a commanding officer. Your day is planned for you. You have these incredible responsibilities in terms of equipment and people. And a lot of times, especially when you've been deployed downrange, your decisions can literally be life or death. And then you go to school where you're responsible for yourself. You have a choice whether you go to class or not. And of course, for some veterans, when it's not, English assignment isn't life or death, they can tend to put that stuff off. I wanted to, and most of my talk is not going to be about PTSD. One of the things we do here at the University of Arizona is we really try and focus on post-traumatic growth. And that really gets down to the issue of being a victim or a survivor of your traumas. Doesn't mean the trauma changes. It's just, again, the way you begin to look at it. Are you a survivor of a victim of it? And you'll see on the slides the various ideas of what it means to be a victim or a survivor. So, for example, survivors accept personal responsibility for controlling their self-destructive thoughts and behaviors. And victims tend to use their trauma as a justification to act out in certain ways that are, in fact, self-destructive. So one of the things that we do here at the University of Arizona is we have tried to figure out ways to engage student veterans. We know, and you all I'm sure know as wellness professionals, the more any student is engaged in campus life, the better they're more likely to stay in school and graduate. One of the problems with student veterans is they typically are married, they have children, and one or both parents are working besides going to school. So we here try and actually do work to engage our student veterans in academic life. For example, we have we call it the PALS program, a peer advocate liaison program, where older veterans will mentor new students coming to the University of Arizona. It gives, one of the things I like to say is in the military culture, service is a big deal. Being of service to something bigger than yourself is a core value. And of course, to come back out into the civilian world, that oftentimes is not a big focus. So here you have a sense of identity that I am being of service to something larger than myself. Certainly for a lot of veterans who are in combat zones or have to answer the question and find out, I'm willing to die for the people around me and they're willing to die for me. You're not going to find that very much on a college campus, obviously. So we have this mentoring program. We also have faculty fellows who come in and talk with students about academic life, how departments, colleges, those kinds of things work. The University of Arizona is also one of the 12 schools in the country identified to participate in what's called the Warrior Scholar Project. This is a 2-week intensive boot camp where students come, for example, here at the university, they spend this time with a cohort of anywhere between 10 and 15 students, and they get immersed in everything from the humanities, English literature, and then a whole week is spent on STEM programs. One of the unique things we do here, we do an honor flight. Those of you who, actually this is a Midwest thing, so some of you may be familiar with this. This is a flight where it started out as family members would take a family member who was a veteran, typically a World War II veteran, back to Washington, D.C. to see the monuments. We were able to put together and continue to put together programs where Iraq and Afghanistan veterans act as guardians for older veterans. And we'll show you a video real quick about how this works and the impact on everybody. So if you could show that, Cindy, that would be great. And I'd ask you to think about places where you can engage your students on your campus in any kinds of activities.
We're just normal people. We got called to duty. We went and done what we were supposed to.
We'll start talking about our war experiences and whatnot. In a way, I think this is good therapy for us.
There's a lot of memories there, a lot of a link to a forgotten war that a lot of people don't talk about anymore. And it's, history that shouldn't be forgotten.
Well, originally it was designed for getting as many World War II veterans to see their memorial as possible. And for us in southern Arizona, that means a 3-day trip because of the distance and the time zones. For many honor flights, it's a 1-day trip. They come in here early in the morning and they fly out late at night and it's over with.
And I think all of you in this room really put the word honor into the honor flight.
We've read about in books, and it's great to get a chance to spend all of this time with them and experience this together. I mean, this is something you can't recreate.
Oh, I think it's something I'll remember the rest of my life, and it's most enjoyable, and I appreciate all the time, and everybody has been so exceptionally very good and went out of their way, and I appreciate it all.
This guardian idea is fantastic. With the veterans, we have common things to talk about. John and I have talked about many things. And his stories are damned interesting. We shouldn't use that term, I guess, but they were.
His service history is very, very elaborate, a very, very long time, and just having gotten out of the auxiliary that's very recently, it blows my mind to still be involved with military for that almost your entire life.
I didn't know what it was about. I don't know any of the students. I didn't know any of the veterans. And after 3 days, I find we have a lot more in common than I realized. We're from the same areas, some of us, and actually trained in the same jobs. And, they pair me up with Don here. And Don he is my future. I see myself in him.
But everybody I've met, very, very nice people, good camaraderie. Really, everyone's been very nice and very pleasant.
And my roommate is a 93-year-old lady that was in the Coast Guard during the Second World War, and her name is Lori.
It's not just us helping them, it's us helping each other. We're either sharing those same stories or we're able to absorb some of the same emotions.
For the past few years, we've lost about 3 or 4 members. So, you know, it's going to be like to the last man.
Everybody smile!
We come back from here with a lot of stories and a lot of tears.
Getting off of the bus when we were there at the Iwo Jima Memorial, you know, seeing that, you know, you had these Marines from small towns and big cities all across the United States. You know, just like us, they answered their call.
Honestly, we've joined through humor. There's a certain military humor that everyone kind of shares in varying degrees, and it gets a little dark and dirty, but it's a lot of fun.
There's a kinship that crosses generations, crosses years, crosses decades that you can't replicate in any other walk of life. I mean, knowing that everybody here has or had the potential to be sent into harm's way. Some of them have come back with wounds, mental and physical, from those missions. Knowing that, it brings everyone together. And one of the ways that they and we deal with the things that we've been through in our time in service is through humor.
This trip impacted me more than anything I've ever known. Fabulous. I recommend it for every veteran who can possibly come. I think it opens up a lot of things you've been holding back, that you don't know you're holding back. And this releases them. It feels good.
Welcome home!
It's going to help me. It's going to sit as a memory for the rest of my life.
I'm very contented now. I can mark these things off my bucket list. I'm done.
This is a wonderful gift. It goes to show you what the American people are like. You know, they don't forget you.
You know, listen, you're not forgotten. You'll never be forgotten.
We're all comrades in arms yet.
I think it's turned out to be a great experience for us, for me at least. I'd never experienced anything like this before. And it maybe partly is because I've never been to Washington, D.C. before, to look at all the monuments and all the historic places.
You'll recall the young Marine who was talking about their generation answering the call. There was a great time during this trip where he was sharing with a number of Korean veterans who were at the frozen Chosin Reservoir, and they were talking about how cold it was. And Calvin, the young man, was speaking about being on a hillside in Afghanistan, complaining about how cold it was, and somebody in his squad reminded him that there were Marines who had it worse in Korea, and they had a chance to share those stories. Because typically veterans will get siloed. Each generation or each war will have their own particular clique, and this really broke that up. The other thing we do is educate. People mentioned the SERV courses. These are 3 courses. There is a resiliency course, a teaching to learn course, and then we have a servant leadership course. And this is based off the work of Warren Bennis, who was the youngest infantry commander in World War II in the European theater, got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his troubles. and he talked a lot about servant leadership. So all of our student veterans in the leadership class must create a service project and get followers. They cannot report on the success or failure of their project. They can only report on the process. That drives veterans crazy because their training is to be mission-oriented and outcome-oriented rather than process-oriented. Unfortunately, if you come to the University of Arizona, to our vet center, you actually see a bunch of students' leadership projects. So actually, I get to come to work every day and see a number of students' leadership projects, including tutoring, things like that. We had a student in the philosophy department, who was actually the young Marine in the last video, who was a double major in philosophy and political science. And he went to his philosophy department and explained to them that there was this disconnect between student veterans and civilian veterans, and he would like to address that in one of his philosophy classes. So he and the professor got together. We went out to the VA, and through their volunteer program, had civilian students go and interview these volunteers. We didn't want them talking to patients. That would take too much paperwork and all that stuff, but they were quite willing to let these civilian students talk to volunteers. And then they came back and interviewed our student veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And then they reported on their findings. One of the things to come out of that is all of the civilians now felt more comfortable to talk with veterans rather than far beyond just thank you for your service. They could actually talk about an experience of talking with other veterans and what they learned from that. The other program we have is through the Department of Environmental and Natural Resources and the Department of the Navy. This grant was originally intended to teach geospatial technology to ROTC cadets. We actually added a portion of to this grant where our student veterans would mentor ROTC cadets about everything from military life to we're the kind of people you're going to be responsible for when you get commissioned. And that has been incredibly successful on both sides. The other project we do here, we call it the Veterans Alliance Training. It's actually three-hour trainings, one about military history and culture. I do a talk about PTSD and adjustment back to academic life. And then we have a panel of student veterans come and share with faculty and staff what their experience was like in the military and why they were motivated to go to school. The last project another project we were involved in is a veteran history project. This is kind of based on the work at Wright State University, where veterans, our younger veterans will interview older veterans, and then it'll be stored at the Library of Congress. We also just got a grant through the Department of Diversity and Inclusion at the medical school, where we're going to provide, much like the veteran or the Warrior Scholar Project, a month-long intensive boot camp for junior college transfers who are interested in the healthcare professions. So this is a place where not only can veterans continue to be of service, but they can use their education. So for example, in the Diversity and Inclusion Project, we're going to have student veterans be mentoring these young transfers from other schools. We also empower our veterans. The mentoring program is incredibly empowering, where veterans get to see that the skills and things they learned in the military can actually benefit them today. A lot of times you'll hear veterans complain about group projects, and they always end up being the leader by the end of somewhere within 2 weeks of the course starting, they end up being in charge of the group. And rather than having them complain, we try and point out to them, this is because you have these skills and you ought to be proud of them and use them and use them as an opportunity to educate 18-year-olds, because 18-year-olds are supposed to be stupid and dumb. They're not supposed to be 23, 24, 25 and have the life experiences you do. The other thing we work on is we have a women's veterans project. This began out of a concern with the suicide rate amongst female veterans, which as a group is about 3 times that of the women's civilian population. A lot of that has to do with healthcare providers tend not to ask women if they're a veteran. Let me give you an example. I have a friend who was and a former patient who was the charge nurse of intensive care at Landstuhl Medical Center in Germany. It's the largest medical facility outside of the United States. This is where all the wounded from Afghanistan and Iraq eventually came through. So you can imagine what intensive care looked like there. She tells the story. She'd gotten out and was driving cross country. She'd visited some friends in Massachusetts and was on the Mass Turnpike, headed back to Arizona in her pickup with her United States Army decal on the back and an Army baseball cap. So she went through one of the tool booths and the guy said, "Tell your husband thank you for his service." And as she tells the story, that line got backed up for a while. So we're trying to do more to engage women veterans on campus. We now do panel discussions in family and human development curriculums, and also in the medical school to just have people, the healthcare providers, think about asking people whether they're a veteran or not, or they have a veteran in their family. We also do, we're affiliated with Student Veterans of America. In fact, a number of our students were the original founders of that group, which now has, I think, 1,300 chapters, and they're now in Europe and Australia as well. There's a great organization. It's something that veterans on your campus, it's a good resource to help them plug into. The other thing we do here at the University of Arizona is called the Tours of Peace. This was a program that was actually developed by a former Marine who sadly died here about 3 months ago. He would take veterans back to Vietnam and go back to their place where they were stationed and fought. And then they would do a service project. And so over the years and decades, the Vietnamese government would give him artifacts from that they had found on battlefields and gave them to him. One of the things was he would receive these dog tags. Unfortunately, Jesse, his health began to fail, so he quit doing this, and we inherited 2,300 dog tags from Vietnam, and now we have begun the process of returning them. To date, we have returned 30, and if we can show that video, this will give you an idea of what this program is about and speaks to, again, the notion of service. So as you can tell, that's a pretty important project to me, but also to the student veterans. And how empowering that is, that they can give a veteran or their family back their dog tags. It's incredibly powerful experience. So this is why I do this. When we first began working at the University of Arizona here, the retention and graduation rates amongst veterans was abysmal. People argue about the statistics, but it was way below what civilians were doing. Through our SERV classes and the work through our SERV class, we were able to retain 90% of those students stayed in school and graduated. And we still have some work to do in the larger campus, but we are exceeding retention and graduation rates, certainly above the national average. This is I'm going to leave you with this last video of what is possible when we focus on wellness, on growth, on building a social support. As most of you know, as wellness professionals, the biggest protective factor, certainly from developing PTSD, but probably most mental health conditions, is a healthy social support system. And what I mean by that is a social support system where we both give and receive. So I want to save some time for questions. So Cindy, if you could play this video, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you, Cindy. So I'm going to take questions. I realize we're almost out of time. I guess the parting thing I'd like to say to you all, this is what can happen when we don't focus on disabilities and people being broken, but when we focus on their strengths and provide a healthy social support system. Again, I regard that not just as a support system where we get support, but also where we give support. So I'll take some questions if you all want.
Great, thank you, Dr. Marks. Now is the time for questions. If you have any, we encourage you to enter them into the question box in the right-hand control panel of your screen. We have had a couple questions come in. We'll go ahead and start with those. Dr. Marks, what strategies can you share with health promotion professionals for how they can best reach veterans on campus with their prevention messaging?
Typically, I would check to see if they have a vet's office or a vet center on campus. I would also check and see if there is a Student Veterans Association on their campus and connect with those people. They can also talk to their ROTC commanders, who a lot of times may have contact with the veteran community on campus. But probably the easiest I would say is check and see if there's a Student Veterans of America chapter on your campus.
Great, and a lot of our folks are seen as experts in the space of alcohol and drug misuse on their campus. And what would you recommend to them to do if a faculty or other staff member reached out to them concerned about a student who happened to be a veteran's substance misuse? What do you think would be the recommended steps that they should employ?
Well, one, and this can happen through the Veterans Alliance training, is finding out what services through the VA are available. For example, we have on our campus, the VA comes to our health center a couple times a month to do physicals, those kind of things. So establishing a relationship with your local VA. And VAs have wonderful substance abuse programs, including with PTSD. It used to be that the old way of looking at things was take care of the substance abuse first, and then you take care of whatever psychological problems may be driving that. Nowadays, it's clearly regarded as a comorbid problem, and it needs to be addressed simultaneously. So I would encourage you to know what resources are available at your local VA. Again, there is on campus, and there's, I forget, there are about 25 VAs and universities have what's called a VITAL program, and don't ask me what that acronym is. I've forgotten. It's something about veterans and academic leadership. So it's really educating yourself about what kind of resources are available to veterans, so a professor can point them in that direction. I would do it just like you would do any student. If a faculty or staff member sees somebody having problems with drugs and alcohol, then you just straight up talk to them about it. And as you all know, a good intervention is not, well, I'm feeling kind of bad. You start giving them the facts. You're not coming to class. Your homework started out great, and now it's, you can barely put a sentence together. And so you kind of present them with, here's the data, and here's what it looks like. And then here are some resources. And then they go from there. Then it's their choice.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Marks, for being with us today. We want to encourage all of you to connect with us on our website, hecaod.osu.edu, or on social media at hecaod. On behalf of all of us here at the Higher Education Center, Dr. Marks, we want to thank you for your service and for continuing to support veterans as they transition into civilian life. And any of those listening in today that happen to be veterans or in active duty, thank you for your service as well. We encourage you to hang out with us when we come back to our spring free webinar series, which will be providing you more details about coming up in December. So keep an eye out in your inbox so that you can see and check out our free webinars that'll be launching starting in January. Until then, have a wonderful day.
Take care, everybody.